Hawaii. Today it's marketed as a paradise, sun-kissed beaches, hula dancers, and luxury resorts. But behind the postcard-perfect images lies a darker truth, one that's been buried under a century of silence, denial, and distortion. Before it became the 50th state of the United States, Hawaii was a proud and independent kingdom with its own monarchy, government, language, and deeply rooted culture. It had formal diplomatic relations with major world powers. Its people lived according to ancient traditions, governed by laws they had created, and led by royalty chosen not by election, but by ancestry and the will of the people. But in the late 19th century, Hawaii became the target of American greed and imperial ambition. In a world where sugar profits, military positioning, and global expansion mattered more than justice, Hawaii's sovereignty was seen not as sacred, but as something to be bought, bullied, or outright taken. This is not the story you learned in school. This is not the version that sits quietly in U.S. history textbooks. This is a story of betrayal, manipulation, and theft, carried out not by an enemy state, but by one that claimed to stand for liberty and justice. It's the story of how a small group of wealthy foreigners, backed by U.S. military power, overthrew a peaceful queen. How the Hawaiian people's voices were silenced by signatures they never gave. And how a nation was swallowed whole without firing a single shot. This is the story of how the United States stole Hawaii, and how, after more than a century, the truth is finally being heard. Long before the stars and stripes ever waved over the Pacific, Hawaii stood as a proud and sovereign kingdom, an oceanic jewel with its own culture, monarchy, laws, and way of life. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, a legendary leader named King Kamehameha I, known as the Great, united the islands through both force and diplomacy. His goal was simple: protect his people from foreign exploitation and preserve their way of life. Under Kamehameha's rule, Hawaii thrived. The islands were not uncivilized or primitive, as Western propaganda would later claim. Instead, they had a highly organized society based on balance with nature and respect for spiritual traditions. Chiefs ruled over districts with clear responsibilities, while commoners farmed the land, fished the sea, and upheld the code of kapu, a spiritual and social system that governed everything from sacred sites to food taboos. But even as Hawaiians nurtured their independence, the outside world began to take notice. British and American ships frequented the islands as strategic ports in the Pacific. Missionaries arrived from New England in the 1820s, their Bibles in one hand and visions of civilizing natives in the other. And while some Hawaiians embraced Christianity and Western education, others saw what was coming: a slow erasure of their culture, autonomy, and land. Hawaii was more than a paradise. It was a kingdom recognized around the world. It had its own flag, currency, royal palace, and diplomatic relations with the U.S., Britain, and France. Yet beneath that formal recognition, powerful American eyes saw something else: a stepping stone in the Pacific, ripe for military control, and a sugar gold mine waiting to be seized. The people of Hawaii had built a civilization in harmony with the land. But in the eyes of imperialists, their islands were not sacred, but strategic. And that shift, from sacred to strategic, was the beginning of a theft. As the 19th century progressed, the future of Hawaii was no longer decided only by its kings and queens, but by the rising economic influence of American settlers, particularly those who profited off sugar. What began as religious missions had morphed into a business empire. The children and grandchildren of Christian missionaries had traded pulpits for plantations, building vast sugar operations across the islands. By the 1870s, sugar had become Hawaii's top export, and nearly all of it went to the United States. With money came power, and with power came manipulation. In 1875, the U.S. signed the Reciprocity Treaty with the Hawaiian Kingdom, allowing sugar to be exported duty-free. But this seemingly mutual agreement was a double-edged sword. It made the Hawaiian economy utterly dependent on American markets, and gave U.S. businessmen leverage to tighten their grip. Then, in 1887, under the growing pressure of these wealthy elites, King Kalakaua was forced to sign what became known as the Bayonet Constitution, named because it was imposed under threat of violence. U.S. armed militia groups, funded by the sugar barons, stood ready to act if he refused. He had no choice. This new constitution was catastrophic for native Hawaiians. It stripped the monarchy of real power and handed it to a legislature dominated by foreign businessmen. It also set steep property and income requirements for voting, effectively disenfranchising most native Hawaiians, who were now strangers in their own homeland. But the foreign elite weren't satisfied with controlling the economy and legislature. They wanted full annexation. Why? Because it would eliminate U.S. tariffs on sugar and give them permanent protection under American military power. When Queen Liliuokalani ascended the throne in 1891, she saw what had been lost. Unlike her brother, she was bold. She proposed a new constitution to restore native rights and royal power, but her resistance terrified the Haole elite. To them, she wasn't just a queen. She was a threat to their empire of profit. What happened next would seal the fate of her kingdom. The storm broke on January 17, 1893. Queen Liliuokalani, refusing to be a puppet monarch, introduced a new constitution to restore power to the native Hawaiian people, returning rights stripped away by the Bayonet Constitution. Her plan was bold, legal, and peaceful. But for the small group of powerful sugar planters and businessmen who had grown rich under foreign rule, it was a declaration of war. That group, calling themselves the Committee of Safety, was composed almost entirely of white American and European elites, men who had no interest in native rights or Hawaiian sovereignty. They knew they couldn't defeat the monarchy in a fair vote. So instead, they plotted a coup. The committee reached out to the U.S. Minister to Hawaii, John L. Stevens, claiming falsely that American lives and property were at risk. Stevens, a sympathizer with the business elite, obliged. Without any authorization from Congress or the President, he ordered U.S. Marines from the USS Boston to land in Honolulu. They marched through the streets, not to protect American citizens, but to intimidate the Queen and support the rebels. No war was declared. No shots were fired. It was regime change disguised as diplomacy. Faced with the presence of American troops and the threat of civil war, Queen Liliuokalani made a gut-wrenching decision. She surrendered, not to the revolutionaries, but to the United States, believing that the American government, once informed, would correct this injustice. Her exact words were a plea. "I yield my authority to the superior force of the United States of America, until such time as the government of the United States shall undo the action of its representatives." But her hope was misplaced. The so-called provisional government was formed the very same day, led by Sanford B. Dole, a wealthy plantation owner. It claimed legitimacy, but had no backing from the Hawaiian people, no royal approval, and no legal basis. It was a government of thieves, draped in foreign protection. In one day, 100 years of sovereignty was undone, and the Hawaiian people, who had never declared war nor signed away their land, were made subjects to an empire they had never voted for. Queen Liliuokalani did not go quietly into exile. Even as she was placed under house arrest in her own palace, she waged a diplomatic war for justice. She sent letters and petitions to President Grover Cleveland, pleading for the truth to be recognized and for the U.S. to restore her government. Cleveland, a Democrat and an opponent of imperialism, was disturbed by what he discovered. He appointed James Blount, a former congressman, to investigate the events in Hawaii. The result was the Blount Report, which confirmed what the Queen had claimed. The overthrow was not supported by the Hawaiian people. U.S. Minister Stevens had acted improperly. The presence of U.S. troops had enabled the coup. Cleveland declared the overthrow illegal and called for the monarchy to be restored. But when he asked the provisional government to step aside, they refused. By then, the business elite, led by Dole, had dug in, and Congress was becoming increasingly pro-annexation. The queen offered amnesty. She offered peace. All she asked for was her throne and her nation back. But in 1895, when a small group of loyalists attempted a counter-rebellion to restore her rule, the new regime cracked down harshly. Queen Liliuokalani was arrested, tried, by a military tribunal, and convicted of treason. She was imprisoned in a small room at Iolani Palace for 8 months. During that time, stripped of power, freedom, and nationhood, she composed music, most famously the haunting song, Aloha. Oh, a farewell to her people and her kingdom. Even in defeat, her dignity endured. She never renounced her people. She never stopped believing that justice would come. But in Washington, justice had a price, and Hawaii wasn't rich enough to pay it. By the mid-1890s, Queen Liliuokalani had been silenced, imprisoned, and released. The provisional government had rebranded itself as the Republic of Hawaii, with Sanford B. Dole as president, a man with no royal blood, no native mandate, and no right to rule a nation he helped overthrow. But annexation wasn't so simple. President Grover Cleveland had resisted it, insisting the overthrow was illegal. Yet when William McKinley took office in 1897, the tide changed. McKinley was an imperialist. He believed in manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was destined to expand across the Pacific, and Hawaii was the perfect naval foothold. But there was a problem. An annexation treaty required 2/3 approval in the Senate, and they didn't have the votes. Too many Americans still saw the coup as unjust. So what did McKinley do? He sidestepped the Constitution. Instead of seeking a treaty, McKinley and Congress passed the Newlands Resolution in 1898, a joint resolution that required only a simple majority. It was a domestic law, not a treaty ratified by both countries. The Hawaiian people never voted on it, the Hawaiian monarchy never signed it, and by international law it had no legitimacy. This was not annexation by mutual agreement, it was a seizure. Meanwhile, native Hawaiians fought back the only way they could with their voices. In 1897, over 38,000 Hawaiians, nearly the entire adult native population, signed the Kue petitions in just 1 month, demanding that Congress reject annexation. These petitions were hand-delivered to Washington. They were seen, read, and ignored. The annexation wasn't about justice. It wasn't about democracy. It was about money, military power, and strategic dominance. And it became official on July 7, 1898. The U.S. flag was raised over Iolani Palace, the only royal palace on U.S. soil, and the Kingdom of Hawaii, a sovereign nation for nearly a century, was erased with the stroke of a foreign pen. What followed was not peace, but cultural destruction. After the annexation, the U.S. government and local authorities moved quickly to dismantle the Hawaiian identity. The Hawaiian language was banned in schools. Speaking it was punished. Over time, it nearly vanished. The monarchy was abolished. The native people were called wards of a nation they had never chosen. Lands were seized, redistributed, or sold to wealthy outsiders. The people who had once ruled the land became laborers on it. Traditional systems of land stewardship were replaced with private property laws favoring the rich. Native Hawaiians, once caretakers of Aina, land, were pushed into poverty, losing access to the very soil that had fed their ancestors for generations. And amid this cultural suffocation, Hawaii became something else entirely, a military asset. The U.S. turned the islands into a Pacific fortress, building bases across Oahu, including the now infamous Pearl Harbor. The same harbor that once welcomed voyaging canoes and trading ships became a launch pad for American warships, and, later, a flashpoint in World War II tourism came too. But not for the Hawaiians. The islands were rebranded as a paradise playground for mainland visitors, exoticized, commodified, and sold in brochures. The native people were reduced to symbols in their own homeland. Hula dancers for hotel lobbies, ukulele players in staged luau's, smiling faces behind resort counters. But behind those smiles was a painful truth. A nation had been stolen. Its queen overthrown, its people silenced, its culture nearly erased, all in the name of empire. A century after the overthrow, The truth could no longer be buried. In 1993, on the 100th anniversary of the coup, something remarkable happened. The United States Congress passed a formal resolution, Public Law 103-150, also known as the Apology Resolution. Signed by President Bill Clinton, it stated plainly what generations of native Hawaiians already knew. The overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii occurred with the active participation of agents and citizens of the United States, and the native Hawaiian people never directly relinquished their claims to their inherent sovereignty. It was a rare moment of official truth, but it came with no legal remedy, no land returned, no restitution, and no pathway to independence. It was an apology without accountability, yet for the Hawaiian people, the fight didn't end in 1893 or 1993. Across the islands today, native sovereignty movements continue. Groups like the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, OHA, and activists from Mauna Kea to Kalama Valley are fighting for land rights, language revitalization, cultural preservation, and in some cases, full political independence. There are schools teaching the Hawaiian language again. Ceremonies once banned are now practiced proudly. The descendants of those silenced are now raising their voices, but the scars remain. Native Hawaiians today face higher poverty rates, worse health outcomes, and lower life expectancy than almost any other group in the islands. Their ancestral lands remain under U.S. and corporate control. Their homes are priced out by million-dollar developers, and their history, until recently, was whitewashed from American classrooms. The fight for Hawaii is no longer just about what happened in the past. It's about the future, who controls it, who belongs, and who decides what justice looks like. Hawaii did not join the United States through a democratic vote. It did not seek statehood as a willing partner. It was taken. Its queen was overthrown. Its culture nearly erased. Its people silenced. But despite it all, the Hawaiian kingdom never legally ceased to exist. Not by treaty, not by conquest, not by consent. The truth lives on in the hearts of those who remember. For over a century, the U.S. told a story of benevolent annexation. But the real story, the one you weren't supposed to hear, is one of imperialism, corporate greed, and cultural genocide. And, now that you know the truth, the question remains, what do we owe to a stolen kingdom that never stopped resisting?